So I just wanted to give an update on the 1080 situation, that is a chemical weapons grade torture poison that has been indiscriminately dropped through the New Zealand bush and waterways for the last 30 years quite intensely. But the new government is planning vastly increased dosage in terms of the poison pellets being much more intense, and double the quantity of dosage. So I spoke about the concern that last week there was imminent poisoning due against the Whātaro River, the Perth, and the Wanganui River on the southern Alps of the west coast of the South Island, which is 30 to 60 k's away from the Franz Josef Glacier. So, poisoning one of the natural wonders of the world effectively, and, small towns with populations of 1,400 and 400. So I wanted to say that the people responsible for the poisoning, ironically called the Department of Conservation, are on location at the moment, but they have not dropped the poison. They have not dropped any further poison since I released the video on Friday, and I did extensive international lobbying on Friday. Now, this matter is in front of the High Court at the moment, with an argument saying it is incumbent on the court to protect the victims of this crime from any further occurrence of the crime until such time that the court has decided on the substantive case of this mass poisoning and this intent to cause grievous bodily harm of torturing animals to death, and then having this, a hormone disruptor chemical that has the capability of sterilizing effectively an entire population at the time, from going in the waterways that flow into all of our town water supplies. So, this is an effective eugenics program. It is arguably an effective eugenics program based on the quantities and consistency of this poison being dropped. Now, what I want to say, partly why I'm recording this video is to say, okay, for now, whilst the poisoners are on site, there is a pause on all poisoning, not an official one, although I am still waiting on the Deputy Solicitor General's position on this matter. I am expecting an answer as to whether these drops will go ahead, and I am creating an interim application for relief so that people are not living in fear in New Zealand of aerial poison drops where their families are at risk of being directly or indirectly poisoned with lethal or sublethal doses of what is a torture poison. If you dropped this in the right quantities of the waterways anywhere in the world, whoever consumes it, animal or human, will be tortured to death. And in lower sublethal doses, completely understandable that issues like miscarriages, sterility, cancers, and everything else that New Zealand is suffering as a health epidemic at the moment are very much arguably linked. Okay, not to mention that the Treaty of Waitangi is kind of, moot and void on this matter, because that guarantees our right, whether we came on canoes or boats to this country, it guarantees our right to forage for food in the bush and drink the water safely, and that is being absolutely annihilated right now. But here's what's most disturbing. Killer robots being sent into our bushes to artificially intelligence enhanced recognition tools to identify animals, basically anything that lives, and target them with poison paintballs. Like shock and bruised and fear and trauma, and then they obviously groom themselves, they lick off that paint and then die an excruciatingly painful death. This is government torture of animals. It's outrageous. And you've got mainstream newspaper outlets, which, let's face it, good old Gina Reinhardt owns, and we know that she has publicly stated that she'd like all people to work for $1 a day so that we can be competitive with the mining out of Africa. Great. Well, just chip us and enslave us, and then that'll be fine. We'll be forced to work for $1 a day, or you'll stop our heart in the middle of the night. Honestly, This is, I don't mean to sound sci-fi when I write poetry these days, but the fact is that we are entering that age and people need to start becoming aware of it, that this technology exists, and those with the extreme, I don't know what you'd say, fortune of having the greatest amount of money and control of our systems are misusing their power. It is not acceptable to have machine G.I. Joes in the bush hunting and targeting innocent animals. They may have come here on our canoes or our boats and been introduced to this land. However, they have a right to life. All the legislation in the world states they have a right to life, and it is not the right of a political group to impose a political ideology on this country where all predators or all non-native species are eliminated. Because here's the thing, that includes you and I. We are effectively non-native species. We are those predators, and we will be eliminated by the kind of doses of poison that the current leaders of this existing Labour Green government plan to inflict on the population's waterways. Okay, but if you're walking through the bush, and there are plenty of examples of people walking through the bush and being actually hit by 1080 directly and becoming very sick, if not dying, and having their lives destroyed, never recovering. This is serious, serious stuff. There is no way that you can drop what the quantities they dropped last year was the quantities equivalent to killing 50 million people if directly consumed. Now, killing by torture, if that is in the waterways, if the tests are in the body of the water, they're not picking up the fact that the 1080 poison sediment is on the surface and on the floor, the river or stream bed. Okay, it's on the top or the bottom, not in the middle. They're testing in the middle, and the reason for that is in the 90s. So I've come across testimony that in the 90s they were testing the surface, and the readings of 1080 were through the roof. The readings of 1080 poison in the Auckland water supply were so high that they were deeply concerned that they changed the mode of testing so that they only tested the body of the water, and they couldn't tell then that the poison was still absolutely there. But I tell you what we have as a result. We have these little tests that show the sterility of New Zealand and the sterility of agriculture animals. This is going into the town and the agriculture water supply. Farmers everywhere have been forced to hide the declaration of their dock poisoned animals and register them instead as some erroneous farm maintenance name or something like that, so that it's not officially on record as government torturing to death animals. This is just outrageous. Anyway, look, I just wanted to give you that update. No poisoning has occurred since my lobbying last week across New Zealand, to my knowledge. I'm doing my best to keep up with it, but as I've made very clear, the DOC website is not easy to use. Certainly all of the elderly in the country who can't afford internet access. It's funny to read that Maggie Barry was the originator of the predator-free program, and I argued against her in the election debates last year because we were both in the North Shore. Mine was like a dabble. I had come back in the beginning of the year and submitted a proposal around to run for Prime Minister as a young woman running for Prime Minister in New Zealand, and a few people thought that was a great idea and promoted someone else to run for Prime Minister in another party, and did a few nasty things to me instead. But anyway, I still ran as an MP, as an independent, and couldn't understand why Maggie Barry was obsessed with two things. One was killing everything that lives in New Zealand that is not a bird, although her method to do that is also killing the birds. And the other was her obsession with getting the elderly, her new website that she'd invented for the elderly, even though, only 5% of the elderly can actually afford access to the internet or know how to use a computer. So I thought that was a bit funny because, just shows why gardeners shouldn't be in Parliament. I mean, let's be honest. Let's have a meritocracy where there's a little bit of an IQ test and people actually know what they're doing when they're accidentally killing an entire nation by an extermination program. Unless she does know what she was doing when she installed that program. As I understand, many people in Parliament did and do. So we have a serious crisis of governance here. Clearly, the route out of this is possibly a new election or the Queen using her reserve powers to appoint new leadership to govern the country out of this, devastation, absolute devastation to our life systems and our agriculture systems, the health of our people, the health of our food products, the safety of our food products. I have got a judicial direction requested on a second body corporate. So for the Reserve Bank, there is no exclusivity guaranteed under the Reserve Bank Act for the current body corporate. So it is entirely possible for the judiciary or the Parliament, if there are any in there that are not, hooked up to these artificially intelligent killing machines that are being set loose in our bush. I mean, I'm sort of having images of Maggie Barry and a artificially intelligence chipped brain running around and targeting possums with her paint gun in the middle of the night in our bush, because that's quite reasonable. I mean, that is the level of this technology now. Wow, okay. She's probably not going to do it personally, especially since she's now on the backbenches. But the point is that I should be serious because I'm talking about something serious. It's a hazard. It's an occupational hazard for me. If I record a video, I tend to crack jokes, which are tasteless because I'm talking about something that is absolutely disgusting. New Zealand is not going to have killing machines in the bush hunting our animals. This is insanity. It is not going to happen. Whilst that does give the appearance that New Zealanders are crazy, we are not. We do not accept it. And the people in government who are doing this sort of inhumane cruelty to animals, I have said earlier today, deserve to be in one prison and one prison only, and that is Guantanamo Bay, where they can experience what they are inflicting on others directly and personally, very up close and personal. Other than that, I'm sure I'm at some stage going to send a few emails off to see how many spare cells in Guantanamo Bay are available right now for those who are responsible for this crime. Other than that, it is possible to appoint a second Reserve Bank body corporate to extend the money supply in New Zealand, whether that be as NZD, although we can't extend notes and coins because the current Reserve Bank body corporate who internationally restrict our money supply have exclusivity on notes and coins of the NZD. We can, however, extend digital credits, and we can extend those as a currency that is interchangeable with the NZD and thus of the same value, of equivalent value. Now, what that means is that we have the power to finance our farmers out of this mess. We have the power to stand back, relook at our distribution of food, what we grow, what we produce, redesign it completely if necessary. Suffer the consequence of losing some of our exports by admitting to the world that a toxic chemical weapons grade poisoning, which has as a hormone disruptor and as it changes the mitochondria of the DNA, it changes the energy cell center of the DNA. Okay, so this has the ability to change the DNA of the animals, for example, that then we go to eat. That has the ability to change our DNA. We are what we eat. Our body regenerates from what we eat. This is all related. We're 90% water. If they're poisoning our water with a sterility chemical weapon, then it is no wonder we have a sterility problem in this country. You know, this is all connected. And it's arguably so. And it's not arguably, they cannot argue otherwise. You know, the PR machine, propaganda has got to stop. Possums are never occurring, almost never, that less than 1% have TB. And TB is stress cells. So this is just a result of their environmental circumstances where they are unhappy little possums, maybe, because they've, I don't know, seen someone from the government walk up across their path and they've never recovered. But there I go again, back to serious. Other than that, they are being, I want to say a rude word. They are, what's a better word? They are being incorrectly blamed for being predators and pests when in fact there's no evidence of that. They exist quite nicely as part of an ecosystem to which they were introduced, the same as we were introduced off the same boats and canoes, okay? We are all immigrants to this country along with the proper possums, and if they're exterminating the possums, then they're exterminating us too, because the line is predator-free, getting rid of all imported species. Well, that is you and me. And with this level of poisoning, there is no question that they will be successful unless they are stopped, and they are going to be stopped. Okay, New Zealanders need to kind of wake up from your trusting little bubble and understand that we are in a crisis of poisoning, that the new government, the current leaders who you love to idolise, are poisoning you, poisoning your waterways, poisoning your family, poisoning and torturing to death animals all across the bush indiscriminately. Auckland Council are part of this too. I read yesterday that they want to kill all the goats. What happens if you kill all the deer, all the pigs, all the goats, all the possums, the rats, everything that you can eat? What happens if there's an EMF electricity bomb here? I'll tell you what happens. Your taps stop working in 3 days. Your supermarkets are empty in 3 days. Then what happens? You need to go to the bush, drink the water and forage for food. Now, if everything is poisoned and all the animals are dead because the people who run, I'm sorry, but this is Auckland Council and the government and probably most of the regional councils around the country, because they are killing everything that enables your self-sufficiency and your right to forage for food in the bush and drink safe water. You are no longer an independent person with a right for life outside of their system. At this level of poisoning, they will be forced to transfer the population by 2030 into the city. And ironically, they are currently at a rate of working to a rate of building housing for what they have calculated to be an increase of 1,600 people per week, every week until 2030. From now, okay? 1,600 people per week, every week, moving to Auckland, apparently with the need for independent new dwellings. It really does sound like they are moving the entire population of the countryside to the city or have plans to do so. Okay. Someone was just, uncomfortable with the mention of the Agenda 21 on this issue, but the fact is that it's a binding statutory, it's not statutory, but it's a binding convention that we signed, and it has now been rebranded as Sustainable Cities and different sustainable development goals that is being systematically implemented into our country and many other countries across the world. We are not one of the countries doing regular updates every month on their website, although most of those are third, developing countries who are doing that. I think we are more of a test program. But now that I've seen that we have artificial intelligence killing machines that are about to be deposited into our bush, I would, before that happens, I would like to see an investigation which has all relevant politicians arrested and interrogated for a massive crime of treason. Now, my case is limited and it doesn't, I don't have powers of that scope. All I can do is argue the statute that I know very well, which is the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which is law in New Zealand, and back that into the surrounding New Zealand law, which supports that argument. And that has a load of advantages, which I won't go into this in this video. But what is really important that we do, if we come to terms with the fact that there is a governance group interacting with a private group of power in New Zealand that are causing grievous bodily harm to the population and to animals all over this country, destroying our water, which is us, 90% of us, that's our life force. They are destroying all life to a deadline. And as I've said, I've got letters to Richard Branson's elders, took me a while to work out who they were. So when I sort of aspirationally thought they might mean something, I wrote letters years ago to them saying, zero carbon is like the breath of life. I mean, you gives you a tool to tax entire populations, redesign our sovereign tax systems to be a global tax budget, so gives the opportunity for unipolar global governance from one group, opportunity for mass tyranny, and does nothing to stop, the Paris Agreement and the zero carbon agreement does nothing to stop the destruction, the industrial destruction, does nothing to hold the industrialists criminally or financially liable for their contamination, or the government in this case. And so it's completely disingenuous, but it does recreate control over our entire financial system to an international ruler, effectively. And also it's the breath of life. So if you start introducing zero carbon legislation and you give technologies that allow carbon reduction, you are giving the power for people to suck the life out of our air for all time. Trees and people alike will be dead. There is some very dangerous changes in our legislation going on right now. The people in government should not be in government. I'm sorry to be so strong on this, because I realise that the change in government will be a major upheaval for the country, but it is necessary to stop, probably having travelled the world and worked against grotesque crimes across the world of industrial contamination and human rights violations for the last 10 years. That's what my life has been dedicated to at the highest international level, right at the front line of the rainforest, coral reefs, the Arctic. This is the most grotesque crime I have ever conceived of. I could not have conceived of it. I cannot believe it is actually happening here. And it has to end. Because there is no question that if you're putting enough of 1080 alone, there is an entire cocktail of poisons being administered every year across our natural bush and waterways that flows into our human and agriculture system. But you cannot use that level of contaminants, toxic torture level, grade contaminants. Enough 1080 alone dropped, if consumed by 50 million people, would have them all tortured to death and dead last year. And new increased doses this year. You cannot drop that level of toxicity into our ecosystem and not expect a complete collapse of life. This is very important. Our government is being ruled by people who I have begun openly classifying as smiling assassins. They have knowledge, that is awareness, that if they inflict such conditions of life upon the population, that they will bring about the physical destruction of at least one or more person within the ordinary course of events. That is a crime. It is one of the worst crimes in the world, and they are currently very, very liable for it. At least that is what I'm arguing, and I expect that there is more than enough evidence to prove it. So New Zealanders really need to start having this conversation. Our water is not safe. Our food is not safe. And we need to own that, be prepared to finance ourselves through that, and get to a point where in 7 years we have transitioned to a world-class, sustainable, regenerative food production system and come out the other side winning and healed. But otherwise, if we don't stop this now, then that health crisis, which is going to force the privatisation of our health system, that PwC are so keen to calculate and predict with such great confidence, that's happening. And that's the other option, is that our entire system will be privatised. All our public land is currently being completely divested into private ownership. Our health system and all the other systems will be privatised. We will be a private, corporatised, global country. That is happening now. It is transacting. And unless we stand peacefully but strongly against this, because you each have the capability to contact your representatives in Parliament and clearly identify which ones are against this happening to harm the population and destroy our economy and globalise and privatise everything that our ancestors fought to build together. And I say that because I really grew up thinking New Zealanders were one that there wasn't this separation of Māori and European settlers. We all immigrated here, canoes or boats. We all shared the same water all our lives. We are one. And unless we join together in unity now, then we don't stand a chance.